for everybody.
I was trying to think how I could transition from that to our next panel, which is horror for kids.
That's what I was like, this is going to go great because these kids need to learn about Teen Wolf from us and not on the streets like I had.
Clearly. So I think that's right. Good.
All right, John Wade, I appreciate it, my friend. I will see you when this pandemic is over and we are both back out there on the road again.
Absolutely, man. Take care, everybody. Love you all.
Love you. Good song. All right, folks, if you are just tuning in, this is the 2020 Scares the Care fundraising event. For those unfamiliar with the charity, we were founded in 2007. We are composed of horror fans and horror professionals, and every year we raise money for 3 recipients. This year's recipients are Ashley. Ashley is a single mom. Her daughter, Natalia, has Marfan syndrome. Now, earlier in the feed, you heard our founder, Joe Ripple, talk about that. You also heard Paul Tremblay, novelist Paul Tremblay, talk about Marfan syndrome. It's a terrible, terrible genetic disease. So we're raising money for Ashley and Natalia. We're also raising money for Laura. She is this year's breast cancer warrior. And we're raising money for Trisha. Trisha had an accident eerily similar to my own. She has suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns to the entire right side of her body. Those are the people we are helping today. Let me stress, 100% of the money that we raise today goes to these 3 families. 100%, because this is a virtual convention. We don't have any overhead. There are no hotel room fees. There are no travel fees for our guests. There's no per diems. I want to point out to you, as our guests are on today, the authors and the actors and the artists, they are volunteering their time. So we ask not only that you support our families, our recipients, but support the celebrities that are coming on and giving their time as well. There are 2 ways that you can donate. If you have a phone, simply text VCARE to 91999. That's V as in vampire, care to 91999. Or if you are on a computer, go to scaresthecareweekend.com and click the donate button. Some of you are watching this on my YouTube stream over at the Brian Keene YouTube page. Others of you are watching this at scaresthecareweekend.com. If you are in that latter group, then we've already taken a step out for you. All you have to do is grab the mouse and click that donate button, and whatever you can do to help, folks. We understand what everybody's going through right now. Believe me, we do. We have volunteers and people on the board of directors that are going through it as well. If you do not have the means to donate today, that's okay. You can still help. As I said, you can support the professionals that we have coming in to talk to you today. You can support us on social media by sharing the stream or by telling friends and family members about the charity and about these 3 families that we're trying to help. So with that, I'd like to segue into our next panel. Parents who are out there watching, this next panel is for you. I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves in full in just a moment, but right now, please welcome Lamar Giles, Stephanie Cooke, Gretchen McNeil, Bitter Karella, Will Bozarth, and Becky Spratford, who are going to share their knowledge about horror for kids. Becky, we are missing Jonathan Mayberry. I'm going to go try to track him down for you.
Yeah, good luck with that. I know Jonathan well. Thanks, Brian.
Right.
Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Becky Spratford, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. And we're going to be talking about horror for kids for all ages, and from little kids to YA. So we're going to start, and I'm going to change up the order each time we go. So I'll let you know who goes first, and then we'll figure it out after. But I would like everybody to introduce themselves. And when we introduce ourselves, I also want you to share the first scary story you remember as encountering as a kid. I'm going to go first because I'm going to talk not a lot today, but I'm just going to introduce myself since some people don't know me. I've actually been on a panel with Gretchen years ago, and I've never met the rest of you in person, but hello. So my name is Becky Spratford. I am the library world's horror maven. Those are the words of my publisher. I write textbooks for librarians about horror. My personal specialty is teen and up. But I also review for Library Journal and Booklist. But I also run the Summer Scares program through the Horror Writers Association. And in the Summer Scares program, we are choosing books for libraries every year, 3 recommended titles for adult, YA, and middle grade. So I'm very well versed in what's going on in that world. And we get libraries connected with them. So we're going to start with actually Gretchen, if you could go. And then we'll go down the bottom row and up the top row.
Perfect. Becky, first of all, it's good to see you again. And thank you so much for being such an advocate for books for kids, especially horror books for kids. We need a little help sometimes in that, because we're not always so palatable, especially to librarians. So I really appreciate all that you do. Good morning, everyone on the West Coast. It's 9 a.m. here. And if you hear screaming in the background, it's one of my 2 children that my husband is currently wrangling. So I apologize. Our house isn't big enough for me to have like a nice, quiet studio. I am the author of 10 young adult novels at this point, most of which are horror novels or murder mysteries for teens. My most recent series is the #Murder Trending series, Murder Trending, Murder Funding, and No Escape, which comes out in September of this year, which is about teens on an island getting murdered on an app for your phone for public consumption, basically. I'm also the author of the book 10, which was made into a Lifetime original movie back in 2017. And the Netflix series Get Even, based on my books Get Even and Get Dirty, just premiered on Netflix yesterday. It's been a crazy 24 hours. And so that's me, and I will hand it off.
Oh,
I think
wait,
Will is the next one.
Wait.
No?
Could you share the first?
Oh, right. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I slept like 2 hours last night.
That's
so
okay.
I apologize.
That you remember really getting to you.
Yes, it was my cousin Steve, who was not watching this, thank God, was babysitting for me when I was about 5 and thought it was a really great idea to watch a TV broadcast of American Werewolf in London with a 5-year-old because he thought it was a comedy. And I was traumatized by this, by the gore. And of course, the initial scene where they're outside, they go to the pub, they leave the pub, like stuck with me my entire life. I don't write werewolves, I think, for a reason. And it's because they actually still traumatize me.
Thank you, Gretchen. How about Will?
Hey, my name is Will Bozarth. I'm a musician, children's author. I co-authored the Spooky Squirrel Stories, books of squirrel, animal, Scooby-Doo-esque horror. You might have seen me at pretty much all of the Scares That Care, either behind a table or playing music in the bar. Working on starting up a new series, which once again will involve animals getting into spooky situations, because everything I do involves fuzzy, adorable animals one way or another. Why not scare the animals too? And the Spooky Squirrel Stories series was geared towards children that were not quite old enough to read, so they made for good bedtime stories up until like maybe 8 or 9 years old. No blood, guts, or gore or anything. That'll be the same direction I'm gonna go with this new probably another squirrel-centric series. Let's see. First scary thing. Growing up, we always had big talking parrots and other such animals. So one night when everybody was asleep, might have been 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear my name being called. What's this? What's this? I go downstairs. All the birds are sleeping. The birds knew my name, but I didn't recognize any of the birds' voices. Birds are asleep. The people are asleep. I heard my name again, but I didn't know from where. Spooky.
So that was a real life scary story.
Yeah.
Okay, Lamar, you're up next.
Sure. I'm Lamar Giles, and I write across several genres. Most people probably know my young adult mystery novels or my middle grade fantasy series, but may not know that I started in the industry as a horror writer, particularly with Brandon Massey's Dark Dreams anthology series from the early 2000s. And I still have dabbled in some horror short fiction in the young adult anthology 3 Sides of a Heart edited by Natalie Parker, and the anthology His Hideous Heart, which is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe stories, edited by Dahlia Adler. And in terms of first scary stories, Will might appreciate this. The Bunnicula books by Deborah and James Howe were huge for me when I was very young. I remember those being the first written stories that stuck with me. But to Gretchen's story about being traumatized, I recall a cousin showing me Poltergeist and Psycho when I was 5. And
what is with 5? 5 is
and
the
what
age.
is with older cousins like traumatizing younger kids?
Well, that always happens.
Very cool.
Next, we're gonna do Stephanie. Yes, Stephanie.
I wasn't sure. I was like, should I just jump in?
Stephanie.
So I am Stephanie Cooke, and I write middle grade and YA graphic novels. So I have 2 graphic novels coming out next year in January. Oh My Gods, which is about Greek mythology. And then the one for which I'm on this panel is a book called Paranorthern, which is a story about a young witch girl kind of discovering her powers, figuring out that something isn't quite right, and her and her friends accidentally open up a portal to another dimension that starts pouring out evil chaos bunnies.
Nice.
So love the fuzzy animals again.
Yeah.
I'm in.
I mean, they're cute, but evil, but like in a cute way. So they have to figure out how to close it and just kind of navigate being kids. And yeah. And the scariest thing, I think, I can't remember. I'm scared of like everything. So like, I don't remember like the first part of when I was first personally scared. So I'll tell you a brief story about the time when I pretended to be, I had a friend and I wanted to not be her friend anymore. And like, as a 10-year-old, I didn't know how to like healthily break up with like a friend. So I pretended to be possessed by a ghost when she was over at my house. So that pretty much ensured that she never returned or talked to me again.
So it worked. It worked.
It worked very well.
So it's a sign that this was your calling, basically.
Yeah. So I know how to scare people, apparently.
Nicely done. And then last but not least, Bitter, your turn. You're up.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Oh, okay. Good. Hi, I'm Bitter Karella. I'm a cartoonist and text game developer, but I'm mostly known for running a Twitter microfiction account called Midnight_Pals, which is a comedy horror account that imagines what if all your favorite horror writers were kids gathered around a campfire to tell scary stories, just like in the old Nickelodeon show, Are You Afraid of the Dark? We just came out with our first book, so we're very excited about that. And there it is. In fact, Brian's got it.
He popped in.
In fact, there's a very nice forward in there that everyone should definitely read. I might be by it. But the thing that first scared me, my earliest scare memory, is a book that we had at the public library that was rumored was so scary that if you read it, you would die. That was a book that I'm sure everyone's familiar with, called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, with the very drippy, gooey illustrations of Stephen Gammell, which is why it keeps getting banned. But also very nice, scary ghost story retellings of classics by Alvin Schwartz as well in there.
And it's so interesting because now I also volunteer at the school library, and that book, we have like every edition and multiple copies. And at Halloween, we cannot keep it on the shelf. And the school goes from kindergarten to 6th grade, and we just let anybody take it home.
Finally.
It traumatized my children when they were younger. I'm like, hey, read this.
I still have my copy from when I was like, 8 or 9 or something. I love it.
Yeah, I had to replace mine because it got way too well worn. And I realized I did not share my favorite because I wanted to let you guys go first. So I have lots of memories when I was like a teen going in the occult section of the bookstore, right? I'm from New Jersey at the local mall. And my dad would let me get any book. So I got all the V.C. Andrews, which at a very inappropriate age. But my earliest memories, I had this obsession. And in libraries, they ask us all the time, like, to librarians, what's your favorite book when you were a kid? And clearly it was 100% Shel Silverstein's Where the Sidewalk Ends. I was obsessed with that book. But looking back, I was obsessed with the really macabre awful stories, like where the people die or are horribly mutilated. So I was like, okay, that's probably the first stories that I had. I have some questions prepared, and then we're more than willing to take questions if people put them in the chat. So let us know. And I'm going to start with the question that we all sort of alluded to, and even Brian did at the beginning. You all know that kids love horror, and I would say maybe even more than adults. And you know this because you've written to them, for them. They're obsessed with the macabre. It's the parents who tend to be afraid of allowing their kids to read it because they're afraid it will harm them. And look, as a librarian, I can cite many studies that disprove this. I'm not going to waste all of our limited time here doing this. And plus, we already know this is a friendly audience to horror. So all that being said, I'm sure you have encountered this sort of bias as you create scary stories for kids. So today I ask you to justify why horror is good for children, and also why you chose to tell your stories to non-adults, to young people, and the way you do it. Because I know a lot of you said you use animals, and Gretchen really uses a lot of realistic teen stuff. But why do you think it's good for children first and foremost? And also why you choose to tell stories the way you do. Let's start with Stephanie, because I really am drawn by the fact that you do graphic novels, which I think is also I love graphic novels for children. Yeah. I'm famous in my librarian trainings telling librarians, if you don't think graphic novels are reading, you need to leave my training right now. You're wrong. And I see it with the kids. So let's start with you with that question, and then I'll call on someone. But if they really want to jump in after, just go for it.
For me, I guess I don't know that I set out specifically to write horror. So I feel like I'm maybe going to be an exception here. I love playing around with different genres. I knew when I was kind of getting started with my career, though, that I wanted to write for a younger audience, like middle grade YA. Like that is like the stuff that like made me who I am, like, sitting in the library all day, every day, and just kind of reading whatever I could. And I knew that's, the audience I wanted to get back to. So for me, I've always kind of been drawn to like supernatural and paranormal stuff. So not necessarily horror, like in the straight sense where like I didn't watch scary movies as a kid because my parents straight up were like, no, like, no, we live in the
country, that backfired.
Small town, like, this is going to end with like nightmares. So I resorted to like seeing all that stuff elsewhere, but I was like deeply drawn to the supernatural and like ghosts and all this stuff. Just again, not in kind of the, like sit down and watch all the Halloween movies or whatever. So in retrospect, like, we see a lot of people talking about like how scary movies used to be for kids, like The Neverending Story was like so traumatic to me. Like Gomorrah still scares me to this day. Yeah. And like, it was so influential on me and just has always stuck with me. I don't really know where I'm going with this whole thing, but yeah,
Oh, that's okay. Do you think that horror for like children, why do they like it? And why is it actually good for them, do you think?
I think maybe kids don't always have the words for like anxiety, and they don't know how to kind of process their fears and emotions and stuff. And being scared kind of is akin in a way to like anxiety and some things that we don't have the language for when we're that age. So I think it's kind of helping us come to terms with some of the more grown up feelings that we don't know how to express. Like we're like, oh, this is kind of what I'm feeling. It's like not quite this, but like almost this. And it kind of helps us process and identify like other things going on with us.
How about you, Will?
I mean, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly how to direct the horror towards the children and making the parents okay with it. It seems to be most parents that walk through Scares the Care nowadays are now my age, which is kind of weird seeing everybody with kids and all I have are these little books I'm trying to sell to their children, essentially. But I mean, not really sure. I mean, I grew up watching Poltergeist and Pet Sematary at the magical age of 6 or 7 years old. So I grew up being allowed to watch these things. My parents were okay with it. Monster Squad and the Twilight Zone were some of my earliest memories. In fact, a Twilight Zone episode is, in fact, my earliest memory. So I grew up with it. And I think I turned out moderately okay. I mean, moderately. I still have my quirks, but who doesn't? So I guess I just kind of want to get children and their parents to realize that horror is okay to grow up with. It builds character. It definitely builds a sense of humor. So, some of the funniest people that I know grew up watching horror movies, and those are some of the people I enjoy being around the most. It helps build a sense of individuality, I guess.
And Will, did you start off trying to write to children, or did you have a story you wanted to tell and you felt like children were the right audience for it?
Honestly, I just wrote what I would have wanted to watch or read. I mean, I grew up with Goosebumps and Bunnicula and Scooby-Doo, and with the love of fuzzy animals, I kind of imagined squirrels getting into like Scooby-Doo situations. How would they act? What kind of speech impediment might they have? So I was just kind of writing for myself, and then as I was reading it back, I realized all the puns I was putting in, how funny and cute it was, and I realized, oh, this would actually be good as chapter books for kids. And some libraries pick them up around different states. I'm not exactly sure where exactly they are, but they're out there, and people keep.
Yep, they are out there in libraries. Yep, they are. That's
Yeah.
great.
How
about you, Bitter? Because you took an interesting track with this. It's sort of the nostalgia and directed at kids.
Yeah. So I think some of my thoughts will probably echo what Will and Stephanie have said about why horror is good for kids. But I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that it's kind of a good space to work through things that frighten or disturb you, where there's no actual peril, so you're not in actual danger. So that's definitely something that's good for both kids and adults in dealing with horror. And another thing is being a kid, I remember, is extremely weird. Nothing makes any sense. The world is extremely scary and just unknowable.
It's still like that.
Yeah, still we haven't figured it out. But I think like as an adult, though, I mean, you have kind of a different way of dealing with the world, and it's kind of sometimes hard to put yourself in that same headspace so that things are the same strangeness as when you're a kid. One kind of horror film for kids that I've been thinking about recently is Coraline, which is a great film. And I think if you're an adult, you watch it and you think, oh, it's a movie about Coraline being afraid of losing her parents. It's about parental abandonment, and that's a normal thing to be scared of. And I think if you're a kid, you watch it, you realize there's a little bit more. It's more about not just losing your parents, but the idea that somehow it's your own fault, that something you did caused this to happen. As an adult, you kind of think like, well, that's a really weird thing to be scared of. That's random. But when you're a kid, you just are so full of bizarre anxieties and guilts and fears that maybe don't make any sense or connect to anything in reality. And I think that a lot of people who write for kids sometimes try to smooth out the weirdness of childhood just because it's hard to understand or identify with your writing unless you do that to some extent. But I think horror is the one genre that really gives voice to that weirdness and really grapples with it and allows it to speak. And for kids, I think that's part of the reason they naturally gravitate toward horror, is because there's the feeling that these are stories that are honest about the experiences they have and the feelings that they have. So
what about the way you tell your stories too? Because you really bridge that connection between the adults and the children and try to bring them together in your stories in a way.
Yeah, so I usually don't intend to write for kids when I do it. I just kind of, since it's a comedic account, I kind of just tell jokes a lot of the time. But I found that the humor is a really effective way to kind of connect horror with kids. It kind of makes it go down a little bit easier almost.
I see Gretchen nodding. What do you about this?
Well, because I do topic? A lot of humor in my books, yeah. And I feel like my most successful books have been when I've been allowed by an editor or publisher to let the two things fly, the gore and the humor. It's the salty and the sweet, right? They go well together. My books are not kid books. They're definitely 14 and up.
Yeah.
They're pretty graphically gory in some of them, which I have a tremendously wonderful time writing. It is about control, I think, for teens. Like, teens have been enjoying horror. Horror movies have been geared to a teen audience since films began, practically. You know, you think of movies like The Blob. That is real. That's for teens to watch on a date night, you know, at the drive-in. Like, that's what it's geared towards. Teens have so little control over what's happening to them, whether that's in 2020 or when I was a teen in the early 90s, because I'm old like that. And horror gives you a place to experience uncontrolled emotion in a controlled environment, right? So for the brief 2 hours you're in the movie theater, or, you know, the day and a half it takes you to read a novel or whatever, you can indulge in this uncontrollable fear, but then leave it and walk away and go back and study for your calculus AP test, or whatever the hell stressor it is that you have on your plate. And I think that is why teens have always loved horror. And I also think that's why adults, as they become parents and become responsible, they don't have that same view of control anymore. Now they are the controller. And so that is why parents are more likely to be like, oh no, my precious child can't watch this. And trust me, I have had so many friends say to me, well, Gretchen, when you have kids, you won't be able to write this stuff anymore. I wrote possibly the most insane, gory book I've ever written, the one that comes out in September, after I brought my son home from the NICU last September. And like, he sat here on the bed next to me, and I typed this book in like a sleep-deprived fever state. And it is not about protecting this child. I'm writing a book to entertain people. And I'm writing a book specifically to entertain teenagers. And that is not going to change just because I'm a parent.
And I think that's what our parents don't get. I mean, I'm a parent too. Ooh, we have an echo, Brian. Maybe you want to work on that. Let's do Lamar while I fix that echo. Lamar, your turn. And I'm just going to give you a warning. You're going to be first on the next question. So.
No problem. As far as horror being good for children, I can speak from personal experience. I grew up in a community where arts aren't very valued. Particularly among the Black children, the emphasis in athletics, the idea of getting a sports scholarship, going on, possibly becoming a pro athlete. And that was never a hope for me. And I was also a child who didn't have restrictions on the art I could consume. And so horror became a love of mine early, and it became a pathway to eventually lead me to a career that really a lot of people wouldn't have considered to be in the books for me. Mm-hmm. And as far as directing the stories towards children now, the thing I find most valuable has been the ability to go into schools, obviously before COVID-19, and show children that there is a path to careers that many of the adults may not talk to you about. It doesn't have to be what I do, but it also doesn't have to be football, basketball, baseball, as was pushed on the Black children in my community. And the thing I say about my community in general is that of all the people that were pushed towards athletics, very few of them went pro. And I'm one of the people that went pro in my pursuit. So I try to push like there are ways to find the thing you love. And horror was my avenue. It could be the arts, it could be mathematics, it could be science, whatever it is. But I love being able to have these stories be the avenue for me to tell children they can find their own way.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And like I said, Lamar, we're going to give you the next question, which you've segued into really well. Throughout the horror writing world, we're really seeing an increase in the inclusion of a diverse group of voices, especially when it comes to children's. It's coming up from the bottom. This movement to diversify everyone's reading options is finally catching fire with the general public, thank goodness. Now, Lamar, you were part of early stages of this movement, and I'm going to let you go first because I think it's important to note that when we're talking about literature for children and teens, there is a need, I mean, in capital letters, for exposing them to literature that's filled with all people and their experiences. It's just imperative. So Lamar, if you want to talk about the We Need Diverse Books movement and then the research and initiatives at all, and in particular, if any of you would like to share your thoughts as we're going through after he speaks, that'd be great. So Lamar, you want to go first?
Sure. Just a quick summary. We Need Diverse Books is a nonprofit that was started in 2014. I was one of the founding members, and the goal of the nonprofit is to pretty much make sure every child has the ability to see themselves in a book. Typically, the publishing industry has skewed towards straight, white, Christian stories. And back in 2014, me and a bunch of my friends, we started a hashtag that went internationally viral for like a week or more, and got all this attention that we didn't want to let die. So we started a nonprofit to help change the face of publishing. And some of the initiatives that the organization has put together, we help diverse interns be able to afford living in New York while they intern at big publishing houses, with the hopes that one day they can help with decision making and acquiring more diverse books. We do grants for up and coming creatives, so they can, supplement their income while they're trying to break in. One of our big, huge success stories is providing a grant to Angie Thomas, who went on to write The Hate You Give, which has been on the New York Times bestseller list for like 3 or 4 years now, I think. We do an award to recognize diverse work that may not be recognized in other award shows. So like, there's a bunch of stuff. I don't want to talk too much because I want everybody else to get a chance. But diversebooks.org is the website. You can go there and see like everything that they're working on right now.
Thank you. And Lamar, wait, real quick, just it's important to note too that the Summer Scares author this year for children is Ellen O, and she worked with you to help. It's so good. As someone, I speak all over the country, the librarians yelling at them to be more focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm actually doing a national one next week. And Ellen's book, her Spirit Hunter series, there's just so many diverse children's horror authors, and I love that so many of them are involved in this movement. But Gretchen, your turn.
Well, I was just gonna go ahead, Lamar.
You gotta say this. Ellen O, We Need Diverse Books was her idea.
Yeah.
She's the one who came up with it. So I just want to make sure that's noted since you brought her name up. It was her brainchild.
Yes. And she's just a fantastic writer and a great advocate. Gretchen.
Well, I was going to say that Lamar's point about sponsoring interns in the publishing industry who are not from white upper middle class backgrounds is so key, because publishing for so long has been white, not just on the outside, not just on the author side, but on the inside. And unfortunately, people buy books based on what sings to them, which are experiences that they are familiar with. And when your publishing industry, especially in children's publishing, is almost entirely not just white and Christian, but upper middle class, right? You go through a publishing house and almost everybody went to an East Coast Ivy League school. It's like there is a homogenous sort of population that works in the industry. And look, I love the publishing industry. Please don't get me wrong. They pay my rent. So, but it's so important what they're doing to bring that change from the inside, because that is how books of other experiences get noticed, because it has to be someone inside the publishing industry saying, I champion this book, I want this to come to publication. And so that, of all the aspects of what We Need Diverse Books has done, and they've done so much amazing stuff for children's publishing, that to me is the most important. As a middle-class white lady in California, like, what do I know? But diversity for me, all of my books dating back to my debut, which is about a half Chinese, half Irish girl who has a power to exorcise demons. I grew up in San Francisco. San Francisco is super diverse. I grew up where I didn't have a lot of white friends, actually. I had a lot of people of color who were my friends, and it just made sense to reflect that. And I think the more that white authors remember that the world doesn't look like them, and to include everyone that they see around them in their work, is good for everybody. That does not mean that we should be telling stories of experiences we don't have, but all of my characters, regardless of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation, are from middle-class backgrounds. So I am telling stories that I know, even if the characters don't always look like me.
And I think, again, the point is so important that we're talking to children and teens. They are living, I have 2 older teens, they are living in worlds that are much more diverse. and where people are much more open, especially about things, diversity, things you can't see, like sexuality. And so they expect that in their books. And if we're not giving to them as children, one, we're doing a disservice to them and their experiences, but two, we're just going to raise another generation that puts the white, middle class, heterosexual feelings at the forefront and as a norm, which is just wrong.
Yeah.
Someone else want to go in?
Yeah, let me just,
Yeah.
I everything Gretchen said there is my own experience too. Like, I'm a white Canadian lady. I live in Toronto. But with me, I work in graphic novels and I'm the writer. So I have like a unique collaboration experience to make sure that who I'm working with to bring the imagery to life, you know, like, is somebody that's not just like another like white person. Like, I can hopefully, you know, my editors have been really good about helping make sure that we diversify who we bring onto our teams and who brings these characters to life. And I think it's important too for other writers, especially like in comics and stuff, to like make sure that they're stepping out and hiring, you know, diverse talent and being inclusive in their stories. So I know, again, a lot of you are doing novels, but like for graphic novels and for children's books, even with illustrations, there's an opportunity for collaboration and to make sure that there's additional voices present on the creative side.
And again, we're going to lose readers if we're only writing to one homogenous way, because like I said, the children coming up don't want to see that. Bitter or Will, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, writing for children and using diversity is kind of fun to do, the way that I did it. I mean, in the Spooky Squirrel Stories books, a squirrel and a bunny live together, and their child is a vampiric duckling. So it's kind of showing people that you can be different and still work well together. That was kind of my subliminal way to tell people it doesn't always have to be squirrels with squirrels and bunnies with bunnies. Everybody can work well together.
And then Bitter.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that, specifically in horror, but this is across the board, the voice in so much of media has been for so long, middle class or upper class, cishet, able-bodied white guy. And especially in horror, that's a real shame, because I think that's a genre that is such a good tool for telling the stories of people who have been marginalized and brutalized and oppressed. And in some ways, it's really the only truthful way to tell those stories. So the fact that those people have been kept out of the genre for so long has really made us all poorer for that, which is why the work that Lamar and also I think everyone in this panel is doing to really amplify those voices is so important.
Yeah, I just watched a documentary called Horror Noir. I don't know if anyone's seen it, about horror and the Black community. And the first movie they talk about, like the original horror movie for the Black community, is Birth of a Nation. And I'd never even thought of it in those terms. And I'm like, of course, that's like the ultimate horror movie. If you haven't seen that documentary, I highly recommend it. It was excellent, totally compelling.
Yeah, great doc. It was a great
Yeah,
doc.
it was very good. And then I just want to give a little bit of a teaser here. You talked about the We Need Diverse Books grants. Look for an announcement from the Horror Writers Association, for which I am the secretary, about something similar coming for horror writers in about 2 weeks. We're just finalizing it right now. So we have a question. Oh, hi, Mary. Thank you. Lamar Giles is fantastic. It's not a question, Brian. It's awesome, but it's not a question. I saw a question come up, Brian, about VC Andrews. Yes. Is there a good age for VC Andrews? So I'm going to start with that. Thank you for that question, because that was what I don't remember how old I was, but it was a completely inappropriate age that I would go every week after something. It might've been Hebrew school. I can't remember what, something my dad would pick me up from. We'd go to the local mall in Flemington, New Jersey. And that one's for Mary. And there was like a B. Dalton's or something. And my dad loved Stephen King, and I was not as into Stephen King. I think there were too many boys, maybe. And I would go to the back. I found the occult section. He just let me get a book. And every time I finished one, I got another one. And those VC Andrews, I think I was probably like 11, but I was an advanced reader. The books I had were boring. And I mean, I don't know what the perfect age is. I think today my daughter's 18 and my son's 15. My daughter could have read those at 13, I think, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I was 12. I was in 6th grade when Flowers in the Attic blew through my 6th grade class, and we all read it. And then I was like, what just happened?
And then you went and got more, right? You went and got more. Of
course. I'm like, incest and kids living in an attic, and what is this? But appropriate age, I mean, I get this question a lot from parents, like, are your books clean? And they don't mean, are your books full of graphic representations of murder? What they mean is, are there sex and drugs? And for the most part, no, there's not. So yay for me. But, you know, they do put recommendations on books nowadays to help. I would say there's a plus or minus 2-ish years, depending on the maturity of the reader, you know, on that. So VC Andrews, I don't know, puberty. I'm gonna go puberty.
Puberty. You know, it's a good point you mentioned, though. People ask, and this VC Andrews questions comes to that, so people can share their opinion about VC Andrews. But this idea of when is my book okay for a kid? And my argument always with my children was, you know, if it was, I used reviews, you know, and library resources. But if they wanted to read it, when my daughter wanted to read Hunger Games in 4th grade, I did read it with her because I just wasn't sure what her questions would be. So we got 2 copies from the library and we read it together. But the idea that you make, Gretchen, that there's no sex and drugs, but there's violence, there's a lot of violence in your books.
Oh, yeah.
And people are okay with violence, but I don't think that the experience of reading VC Andrews at 11 is any worse than reading an extremely violent book at 11. It's just different things. So just about the VC Andrews, if in your experience, or this idea of age restrictions on horror. Anyone?
I think it just depends. Like, I don't really have any, like, again, my parents were very protective of me for that. Like, they didn't want me watching like hyper violent stuff. I wasn't allowed watching like, you know, anything horror at my own home. I didn't have video games. We didn't even have a TV most of the time. Like, my parents would hide it in our garage and like just take it out for specific times. But like reading was where I did find those things. And I think it's hard to kind of really stay on top of that. Like, I'm really grateful that my parents, even though like they've turned me into like a wimp to watch horror, like I feel like I explore a lot, like, you know, when I read, and they've never really set a lot of restrictions on me. Like, when I was a kid, I earned my allowance by reading books, not by chores. So I was always hungry to, you know, find more. And I lived in a small town, and we had a post office, a grocery store, and a library. So I spent so much time there and just drawn to like a lot of history stuff, weirdly too, and like traumatic history stuff though. So like it was just, you know, I was really fascinated with it. And I think letting kids decide, you know, to a varying degree what they're capable of handling is, you know, like important. Because had I been scared of something, but I still wanted to read it, I definitely would have come to my parents and been like, oh, I can't finish this spooky thing, but I like it, but show me, like, come sit with me. You know, like, I think, you know, your kids know themselves, and within reason, it's sometimes okay to let them decide what they're ready for within reason.
I think that's a good point, Stephanie, but I would disagree with you slightly that people know their kids. They might know them, but when they come to the desk at the library, they're like, it's like what Gretchen said before, like, not for my kid. And I do a lot of, you know what, why don't you go look for books for yourself? And I'm going to help this kid right now. Anybody else on this? Or there's another question we have that came in. What is this? Which TZ episode? Do you know that, Will?
Yeah. I guess he's referring to me saying that my earliest memory is a Twilight Zone episode.
Zone, that's right.
Yeah, Nothing in the Dark, the Robert Redford episode, when there's an elderly lady that's in the condemned apartment building. They're trying to kick her out so they can bulldoze the building and build something else, and she refuses to leave. Her entire world is there. It's all she has left. She's all alone and she's terrified of letting anybody in because they're going to force her to leave. And Robert Redford shows up and he's wounded and he's sick and he's trying to convince the old woman to let him in and to help him out. And she finally says yes, but please, I don't want you to hurt me. I don't want to die. I don't want to leave. Well, spoiler alert if you haven't seen this episode from 40, 50 years ago, but he winds up being death. And he gently helps her along and move on from this life. She looks down, she sees her body on the bed. Oh, that didn't hurt at all. And that's pretty much how the episode ends. I guess a weird way of saying, don't be afraid of death. But
Thank you, Will.
That episode's my earliest memory.
So we're going to go to this question that was actually going to be what I was going to ask next. So thank you, Sean, for this question. You can see it on the screen there. We want to know what movies you think would make a good gateway into the genre for kids, not the ones that traumatized you. And we already mentioned Coraline, which I think is a big one. I know for my kids, that was a big gateway. But just in general, not just movies, any, I would say books and movies, TV shows, things you think make a good gateway for today's kids. I know, for example, Brian's son really likes Gravity Falls. And for him, I know that's been a great gateway. And that was a fun one for my kids also. So just thinks, Lumberjane. I love Lumberjanes, Brian. And so share with me books and especially media that you think are a great way for kids to get into the genre. And please feel free to include things on the internet too, because I know my kids don't watch a lot of TV these days. So let's start with you, Bitter, since you kind of do that type of thing already, sort of introduce kids to horror.
Absolutely. I've got a couple I should mention. This first, cartoon-wise, Gravity Falls is a great one. It's just it's just a great hodgepodge of different horror in there. You've got David Lynch, you've got Creepypasta, you've got X-Files type stuff. So that's just it's a great way to like get a Cooke's tour of all the different horror genres in one thing. A couple other cartoons I really think are good gateways are Courage the Cowardly Dog, which is kind of like an old-fashioned creature feature, and Flapjack, which is deceptively disturbing body horror all the way through. And one other thing that I'll mention is this is a little older, so I don't know if kids still read it, but I think they still hold up, is the work of John Bellairs.
Oh,
who did,
yes.
Yeah.
Just brilliant Gothic mysteries.
I talk about him all the time. They're so good.
They're the best. And the best part, those Edward Gorey illustrations means parents never object, even though they're full of all sorts of...
So good.
Excellent. Thank you, Bitter. Gretchen, do you have sort of gateways you like? You might be thinking about that now with children.
I'm so excited people talk about John Bellairs because I feel like that's like my 70s, 80s childhood come to life, and nobody's as old as me, so nobody remembers them. For slightly older kids, maybe like younger teens who are maybe squeamish about the idea of horror movies, I always recommend one from the 80s called April Fool's Day. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie. Again, I'm going to spoil something that's 40 years old, but the whole point of this movie is that at the end, all of it was staged, right? So none of the gory deaths actually happened. It's about I think it's Deborah Foreman stars in it, and she's trying to turn this island she inherited into like a horror themed resort experience, and so it's all like special effects but she brings her friends and they don't know that, and they get hunted down one by one, and then at the end you see that it's all, so you get to experience this fear of like a traditional slasher movie, but then at the end it's like the like Deus Ex Machina of it all being not real. And I think for kids, like I said, younger teens, kids who are scared of that kind of stuff, it might be a good sort of gateway drug where they can experience that gory fear and then have it be okay. It's not Friday the 13th where like she's floating in the boat by herself at the end, it's everyone having a meal together because they're all still alive. So
that's a great way to do it. So you take away some of the fear. What about you, Lamar? Do you have any suggestions to get kids going?
Yeah, I have 3
Into
actually. For younger kids, I recently watched the Hotel Transylvania films with my nephew, and he loved them. He wasn't scared, and he had a lot of questions about the creatures. And I was explaining to him how they're based in a lot of the Universal monster stories, or movies. So I think that's a good way for me to kind of work him up to something that's a little more edgy. And then if comic books, I really enjoy Victor Laval's Destroyer comic, his take on the Frankenstein mythos, maybe for a little older kids. And then if you have a kid who can tolerate old films, I've had some varying success with some of my younger relatives. Will mentioned, I think, the Monster Squad earlier. And so if you have a child that will sit through an older film with those practical effects and the outfits, I think that's a good one.
Thank you. So, Will, what about you? Anything else you think you should give kids besides Bunnicula?
Yeah, I mean, besides Bunnicula, I mean, I do know of a pretty good book series. It's kind of hard to find right now, but if you send the Spooky Squirrel Stories Facebook page a message, I'll send you some PDF files of the books that we wrote. I could never really think of any good way to get kids into horror, so that's one of the reasons I decided to market it to children, to kind of get them used to the idea of skeletons and vampires and spooky things, but by being cute. So Spooky Squirrel Stories was a pretty good way for weaning them into it.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I have a few. So again, like my world is like largely graphic novels. So I think some of the amazing gateways through that are like Anya's Ghost by Vera Brosgol, about like a little girl who finds a ghost in a well and thinks it's her friend, and then things take a bit of a dark turn. It's very like Coraline-esque, and the illustrations are beautiful. It's great. And kind of similar to that, there's another book more recently called Nightlights by Lorena Alvarez, and she's done a series for No Brow. But the first one is kind of Anya's Ghostish. It's got these beautiful spreads, and just like it'll kind of lull you into a false sense of security, because like there's just some really creepy moments with, again, like ghosts and spirits and kids processing what those are. And yeah. And then I think the last thing, I mean, it's always a classic, Goosebumps. Like, you know, they've obviously been, it's one of those franchises that hasn't died and just keeps on revitalizing itself. And now they have like the newer movies, and they've done some graphic novels as well. So for kids that like don't read, you know, there's graphic novels. For kids who don't want to even read graphic novels, there's movies, there's the old TV show. Like there's so many iterations of Goosebumps that have obviously, you know, lasted through the test of time. And it's a classic.
Yeah, my kids loved the movie, the adaptation with Jack Black, where it sort of deconstructed the stories. I'm going to put a shout out to some movies that I showed my kids that were from my 80s childhood, but Gremlins and The Goonies. You know, I think The Goonies is a nice gateway because it's an adventure, it's a coming of age, and it's got some spooky stuff in it. But like Gretchen said, it sort of all kind of resolves, is a little more realistic.
And there's a monster in the dungeon. I mean, poor Sloth.
Yeah, but he becomes their friend.
Yes.
He's a misunderstood monster. So it sort of evens it out in a way. And those still seem to hold a lot of traction. But Lamar, I love the Transylvania, those movies. My kids saw those and liked them too. We just have a couple minutes to wrap it up. So if everybody just wants to go very quickly, are there any other creators for children that you want to give a shout out to? I'm going to do one for adults or one for YA and one for kids. This year for Summer Scares, one of the books we picked that I read was Hoodoo by Ronald Smith. Okay, first of all, it is scary and it's middle grade. It is excellent. It's based on old voodoo traditions, and it's in the swamps in Louisiana. It's excellent. And then a YA that's coming out that I gave a star review and he was already on, but Clown in a Cornfield. If you want to find, by Adam Cesare, if you want to find a book that's going to connect adults and their teens, it is similar to Gretchen's stories with the social media and all this, but it's got all the old school of the 1980s slasher movies, but with kids in charge now. So that's a good one. Anyone else want to give a shout out to something that's new to them or that they want other people to read?
There's more R.L. Stein.
More
R.L.
Stein.
R.L. Stein's very active on Twitter, and he's constantly writing, constantly releasing new things and making new series. So he's always reliable.
He came to my kid's school. We just have a couple minutes left. Lamar, did you have one? It looked like you were going to jump in.
Oh, I'll say Tiffany Jackson's psychological horror. So allegedly. And
allegedly, so good. Yeah, and I'd like to pitch Zoraida Cordova's Labyrinth Lost series.
That was also Summer Scares this year.
Awesome. And Danielle Clayton's The Bell series, which is this kind of like, it's not technically horror, but it is disturbing, like in its sort of like representation of beauty in women, and it's fantastic. So and they're my friends, so you know.
And let's get Bitter and Stephanie in before we finish and go back to Brian.
Sure. Very quickly, I'll just pitch one that's this is a free online text game. Since I'm a little involved in text games, I figure I'll give a shout out to my community. It's called Boogeyman by Elizabeth Smith, and it's all about kids being kidnapped by the boogeyman and the feelings of anxiety and guilt that kids deal with in that. And it's a very effective little horror game. I think it's great for adults as well as kids. So you can find it on Google, Boogeyman by Elizabeth Smith.
Thank you. And then Stephanie, before we get a fundraising update.
Yeah. So I think, again, speaking on graphic novels, sorry, that's all I'll do. But Raina Telgemeier and her book Ghosts, it's not like strictly horror, but it kind of harkens back to what I was saying before, where we process like horror as kind of like our emotions. And this girl deals with, you know, her sister dying and learns about ghosts and what that means to die. And I think it's a really interesting way to kind of, you know, approach that genre. It's really great. And she does such a good job, you know, touching on kids' emotions and feelings.
Well, thanks everybody for sharing this. I hope all the people out there go get their kids some horror books.
Thank you.
Everyone donate now. Brian's going to tell you about that.
Sorry about that. We got a full studio here. Yes, Becky Spratford, Bitter Karella, Stephanie Cooke, Lamar Giles, Will Bozarth, and of course, Gretchen McNeil. Appreciate it, all of you. I lost John. Okay. I'm going to kick all you out.
Yay, technology.
We were supposed to transition to John Dugan from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but he's dropped out here. So I'm going to move some people out, and hopefully that will free it up. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.